You are now in the Reality Capture Network.
All right, welcome to the Reality Capture Network. We're excited to have another discussion around new technologies today, and we want to welcome Zachary.
Happy to be here. Love having discussions.
Perfect. We're going to kick off with letting you kind of give a little introduction. We'd love to hear your kind of where you're from and then a little bit about your current role.
Sure. So I grew up in a very small town, Seneca, Kansas, about 2,000 people. And looking back, you don't really understand the type of environment you're growing up in until you've got hindsight to put it in context. And that small town kind of culture and mindset really kind of helped define my life as I went forward. It's about an hour away from Manhattan, Kansas. So I went to Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas. Go Cats.
Woo.
Big college football fan. We didn't do so hot in basketball this year, but that's okay because the tournament got canceled, so we don't have to worry about not attending the tournament since there was no tournament.
I do have to say one thing real quick.
Sure.
So we actually just did a project in Manhattan, Kansas, and
Perfect.
We hadn't really known Manhattan, Kansas before, so we told one of our crews, hey, you guys want to go to Manhattan? Of course, they didn't know it was Kansas. That was our first experience with Manhattan, so that's cool.
Yeah, it's a great place. Loved it. Wish that it was a little bit of a bigger city so that way I could continue to work in Manhattan. I really like the culture of the town.
Yeah.
It's a lot focused around that campus and Fort Riley, the big red one. So when I was at K-State, I was studying electrical engineering. K-State is one of the few colleges in the nation that has a very robust power systems department. And so that's where I did my focus. In K-State, a lot of colleges are going towards the model that K-State set up, where you get a specialization, especially with electrical and computer engineering. It's such a broad field of study that you really need to have some level of specialization.
Yeah.
And K-State's department is really heavily focused on power, which is pretty unique. There's maybe one or two other colleges in the nation that have a pretty robust power systems program. And that's really where I got my foot in the door on the industry. I did a few internships here and there. Fun fact, I did an internship at a sausage factory over the summer, and my parents thought I was joking when I told them I got that internship. But just one more experience that really, helps you along the way. I worked in the maintenance department, and as an engineer, that's invaluable experience talking with the men and women who maintain the facilities that we engineer.
Yeah.
A little bit rough around the edges.
What made you pick pursuing electrical?
So I had uncles that did electrical engineering, and just seemed like the thing to do at the time. I saw the salary, and I was like, I like that.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome.
So, after K-State, interviewed with Burns McDonnell out of Kansas City. So it's about a 2-hour drive. So, still within stone's throw, relatively speaking, of my hometown and my college hometown, and took a job there about 6 years ago now. And I've been there ever since. I started in the substation department, which is a part of our transmission and distribution division.
Mm-hmm.
We serve almost every industry out there, oil and gas, aviation, federal, facility development, data centers. Our biggest division, which is the division I'm in, transmission and distribution, is in the power sector. So we work hand in hand with our energy division. They develop power plants. We develop the transmission system along with that. And then we also help a lot of our clients on their transmission system. So I did about 5 years of EPC, which is engineer, procure, construct projects, where I was the substation designer on the protection and control systems, as well as the physical layout of the switch yards or substations.
Mm-hmm.
Spent a lot of time on power plants for the switch yard portion of that. So about 4 years of that. In parallel with that, over those 5 years, I was working on innovation projects. Burns McDonnell actually has an internal innovation program called Ignite. I participated in the very first season of Ignite, which was about 4 years ago now. And the idea that I proposed, Ignite, to give you an idea, is a little bit like Shark Tank, way less severe in terms of the questioning. We're not going to get grilled over it, but they do question you. Yeah. There's 3 phases. So the first phase is just a 1-page submission of your idea. The second phase is a full business development. And then the final phase is you're presenting to the board of directors and 500 live audience members. So it's a little bit stressful if you make it to that final round, which I was fortunate enough to do. With augmented reality was the idea, wearables specifically, and how it could affect our construction world, and then developing a reseller model around that. I did not win, but the chief operating officer, John Olander, liked the idea, and he's like, you should continue to do that. So I continued to work on that. I also continued to participate in future seasons of Ignite, and I'm happy to say that I did fortunately win a later season of Ignite with a different idea. But augmented reality, mixed reality, assisted reality, extended reality, whatever you want to call it, that's where my bread and butter is. I know a lot about it. Been working in the industry for about 4 years now in that particular industry, in parallel with all of my engineering projects. And then that kind of slowly developed into a full-time position where I'm an innovation manager. And I'm happy to say that I now manage or co-manage the internal innovation program called Ignite. So do a lot of cool innovation projects, primarily right now with COVID. Yeah. I'm leading our assisted reality technology deployment, which came out of that first season of Ignite. And that's been invaluable for us in terms of remote communication with the field during these really troubling times, not being able to get to site and lack of communication. So when you're able to video call someone in the field, helps out quite a bit. So it's in hot demand right now, I'm happy to say.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen the same, a lot of discussion around, the fact that technologies like laser scanning and photo documentation and drones and having virtual sites, this COVID shutdown has really brought to light, man, it would have been nice if we documented that site prior to the shutdown, because now we have tons of staff who can't go there to take photos or take measurements, or so there's a lot of discussion around that for sure. Well, thanks for kind of the overview of how you got to the role you're in. Sounds like a lot of fun, focusing on the new tech, and then the Ignite program within Burns McDonnell sounds awesome. I've heard of something similar within a couple big firms, and it's really nice to see that focus, because there are a lot of companies that don't really create their own opportunity for improvement within their company. So seeing programs like that is really cool. So I think it'd be cool to jump in and talk about a few of the different technologies specifically. Our network here is really focused on anything new that's being able to be, utilized and implemented within architecture, engineering, construction throughout different industries. So let's jump in and kind of just tackle one at a time, just a little bit of discussion around. So let's start with laser scanning. Really, obviously, there's several types. There's smaller handheld, really fine accuracies. There's the terrestrial scanning. There's handheld units. There's mobile carts. There's aerial. I'd love to hear kind of your feedback on, around LiDAR and laser scanning specifically. What's some of your hands-on use cases that you've either used or seen or see, interest and need for?
Yeah, so hands-on, I did a power plant project. Actually, Orange County Choppers, if you're familiar with the TV show that aired a few years back, it was actually in that city where Orange County Choppers is located at. And so there's a power plant there that I helped develop. And we had to do a LiDAR scan. It was a green field site, so just a pasture beforehand. And then midway through construction on the switchyard side, we found out that our construction subcontractor had strung the cabling for the power lines during the winter. And during the winter, it's contracted. And so during the summer, what happened, in addition to the heat that is generated from the electricity, the cable started to sag, and then we had clearance violations. So we had to send a Faro scanner, which is typically our LiDAR scanner of choice. We sent one to site. We got precision measurements of everything in 3D point cloud, worked with our civil engineer, found out where our electric clearance violations were occurring, You think back just not too many years ago, and we would have had to have gone out there with a tape measure, and hopefully we would have measured properly. But you never know with a tape measure. You get that wrong just a little bit, and your electrical clearances, if they're violated, you're going to find out real fast when you hear a giant boom. So that's my personal hands-on experience. It helped immensely. Within my division, we try to use that technology as much as we can, especially on brownfield sites that have already been put into service, upwards of 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And getting those fine millimeter grade accuracy, it's vital to those projects, because the drawing sets that we get, I mean, they're from 100 years ago. They're rasters. You don't always know what level of accuracy they are. So if we're able to get those scans of those really old sites, that helps out quite a bit. I would say that the transmission, distribution, electric utility side, we don't use it as much as some of our other industries, especially oil and gas.
Yeah.
Oil refineries, where there's just a tremendous amount of piping, they use that all the time. And in fact, I think that's their new standard now. They don't even want to use the manufacturer drawings or the client's drawings in terms of their accuracy. They do not trust them. So they'll go out, they'll get their scans, and then they take those scans, put them into a 3D model, and then they just take elevation cuts and provide that as the end deliverable. So our customers, when we do that, they don't only get, the engineering product that we develop, we're also giving them the exact dimensions of the laser scan. So they're really getting an up-to-date drawing package to match the real world.
Yeah.
I have recently seen, I think it was Boston Dynamics, mounted a LiDAR scanner in coordination with another company. So that way their little robotic dog can go around and LiDAR scan. I thought that was great. I'm really hoping that in the future, especially on, multi-billion-dollar projects where risk is just huge, that you get those up-to-date LiDAR scans. Typically what we see right now is you'll scan at the beginning of the project and then you just have that scan. But I would absolutely love to see it. If we could do daily scans, construction progress, you start talking about being able to monitor within a model, cost, schedule, and you start getting out to that 8D realm. And I think that's really the future of the industry, and hopefully we can adapt to it. I think issues like COVID really start to drive people towards innovation, and I think some of the processes that people are developing right now in an effort to mitigate some of the COVID impacts, I think we'll see some of those stick around. At least I hope they stick around. It definitely works out from the innovation department perspective.
Yeah, no, I think they definitely will. I mean, you hear everybody talking about, where is that line going to be drawn for the need to travel to a site now? When it even just meetings, things like meetings. They used to be, we're going to have this physical site. Now it's like everybody's getting used to virtual because they have to. And now you realize there's a whole lot more application for it, and it's really not something that should be put off. It reduces cost, it saves time, you get more in your schedule, and I think the same goes for actually applying these technologies in industries. Just the fact that within a couple clicks of a button you could open a virtual data set from different facilities versus whole project teams going, shutting down sites or dealing with safety training and then a walkthrough and then a photo and then a measurement. I think that even just basic site documentation, whether it be imagery, scans, then having the point clouds on the models, I think some of it is getting applied immediately and will probably stick around more so. And then I think your mention about having those full as-built of sites and not it just being a one-time project, that's something that I've been wanting to push for a long time, especially in facilities in oil and gas and chemical, in food processing, places that there's complexity and it's a site that they change a lot. It's not like it's built, it's a building, it's good to go for however many years till someone else renovates it. In facilities that are changing like that, not having it be a one-time scan. We have seen facilities where you've got 3 different companies out there with different scanners scanning different areas of a facility for a single project. And then, you get your measurements out of it, you throw the data away, they use the model. Now you're back to there's no updated as-built.
Exactly.
The process really needs to become documenting the whole facility, building in a control system, having that method set where you can go in and design a project, construct it, rescan it after it's built back in, re-update the as-built, so you've always got that living as-built data that can be pulled in an emergency project, in a replacement of equipment, versus the way that it's done now. That I think there's a lot of wasted data. So I think that's definitely a direction that things will continue to move as it gets cheaper, and there's ways to manage that well, which a lot of people don't really know how to deal with that data yet.
Yeah. And to be honest, it utterly baffles me sometimes that we have all of these innovative, amazing technologies and very few people are using them. So what I've seen a lot of is change management is just a huge part of innovation. It's not something that I ever thought would come up when I started down this road 4 years ago.
Yeah.
But it is something that if anyone listening is considering deploying any level of new technology, you really need to start thinking about that. People are people, and even if it's a better way to do a process, it might be a new learning curve for them, and they need some sort of support system, and that's where change management comes in. And in terms of justifying the value, because you say these grandiose statements like we could save 50% on a project cost if we deploy this new process. Executives start to question that a little bit, and they go, well, that's a pretty big deal. But what I've never heard an executive question is, we can reduce risk with the technology. And so I think that's what I try to phrase it when I talk. A lot of executives and extremely intelligent people, but they are a little bit disconnected from the boots on the ground type individuals who are executing and deploying projects. And if you can explain to them how it's going to mitigate risk, they're far more likely to buy off on a technology. When you're trying to explain value adds and processes, it might be a little bit too complex for them at the level that they're thinking. But those are some of the techniques that I've seen, and it's just interesting in general trying to deploy new technologies. There's always that person aspect and the people aspect that we tend to forget about, especially in my realm, where engineers are engineers. I'm sure everyone's dealt with them, and we have that stereotype for a reason, but you really need to think about the people aspect of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, safety is one of the biggest selling points for new tech especially within what we're talking about in the chemical, nuclear, oil and gas. They're so focused on mitigating risk, and just the ability to have just as much visualization, planning, photos, measurements by sending one person or two people, a crew go and document a facility, and now you can have 20 people sitting in a conference room, virtually walking through, virtually taking measurements, and not have 20 people with the increased risk that brings going into a chemical plant or a nuclear site. That's huge, because you just think about what is the cost of one accident, or having additional people there if they're exposed to something. And that's the same for even other industries that maybe seem simpler, like surveying. Land surveyors standing in the middle of a road to get a shot versus laser scanning it from the sidewalk. Now you don't have to worry about the risk of walking out into the road and lane closures and permits, and even, again, simple things like taking measurements on the side of a building or the side of a tank in an industrial setting. You don't have to get a lift. You don't have to get a tape measure. You're pulling out your tripod. You're scanning it from ground level with less equipment needed, less increased risk activities, even if exposure to a chemical or something isn't the risk. Just the additional equipment needed, the additional processes needed, and the risk of removing that. You're not going up in a lift with what could happen. You're taking all those things away.
It's really amazing. You brought up the idea of a virtual walkthrough, and I mentioned risk mitigation is a great way to get executives to buy in, and COVID's pushing that. I mean, you talk about those safety aspects, and safety, that's very difficult to track. How do you prove something safer?
Yeah.
And things like COVID, or how we are proving that, where they go, okay, we start to see it now, and it's across the board. People understand the safety value of it. We actually executed a project We didn't use a LiDAR scanner in this particular project. We used a Matterport scanner.
Yep.
And we got an entire scan of it. It was honestly just someone's backyard where they were going to develop a new substation for one of our clients, and we couldn't fly out there. It was California. You'd go under a quarantine. The bidders couldn't be there, so Burns McDonnell deployed one of our Matterport scanners, and we just Matterport scanned the area. We set up a public website for them where the bidders as well as the client could go in, and we just did a virtual walkthrough, and a lot of the bidders sent back feedback saying, if this was available every time, we would just do this.
Yeah.
And so we do that on the Matterport side. It takes a little bit of time to get those scans processed. So what we try to do is we try to do a scan, and then we also have the technology that I am deploying, which is the RealWear technology. So you can do a video call, and that video call is not going to be in 4K, but it's going to give the bidders the opportunity to answer questions while you have someone in the field doing the scanning, and then going back through with that high resolution image after the initial walk down and just clarifying everything. It's shown significant value. I mean, not only from a safety perspective, people just like it. And now that they're kind of being forced to do it this way, whereas in the past, we always offered it and people said, well, you have to be in the field. There's no other way.
Yeah.
And I think that there is something to be said about having an individual in the field, but I think that we spend way too much money sending people to site who perform the same exact experience and job in the office. And to be honest, I think that their family would enjoy it a lot. I know a lot of people who travel just a tremendous amount getting burnt out because they're constantly on the road. And if you can reduce their travel by 50%, then you're reducing the turnover at your company, and you start to think about all these side cost savings that these types of technologies provide to you. It just starts stacking up, and a lot of that you can't track. You can propose that that's going to happen, but you can't track that until you've been using it for a couple of years. And so I think COVID's accelerated that, and we're starting to see a lot of those benefits much more quickly than under normal rollouts. We would have seen it.
Yeah. I think one of the issues is, a lot of times the technologies are being utilized for the subcontractor of a subcontractor of the construction company so by the time you get up this chain of companies, the higher level companies and even the owner probably don't even know that it exists or that it's being used. And I think one of the goals needs to be educating from the top level down, because if an owner in this scenario, can say, I have this facility, I've analyzed over the X amount of years that we have this many people come visit the site because of the amount of projects we have. What's the risk and the cost and the utilization savings for the owner themselves of having that site documented and being able to give access to all the contractors underneath them, versus it just being a technology that a single engineer uses for their little portion and nobody else on the project even knows that it's there, or they're not getting the benefits from it. I think trying to continue to push the education upward and sharing what can be done with that technology versus, a lot of companies try to hold it really tight and not want to tell anybody that, man, we scanned this plant, but we don't want that guy to have it or this guy, because now they're going to get to utilize our data and see the value. And for some industries, I totally understand the competitive side of it, but I think for some industries, it's really important that we continue to open and collaborate and push it together for the value and the savings and the cost and the safety. It's got to be a collaborative push.
Yeah, I've heard the idea of kind of a data lake for a project or for a company in general, where you just kind of dump all this data in there. You kind of forget about managing the data for a little bit, but you've got a central location where all this data is stored. And you talk about that where you've got a sub of a construction company, and that something like that where you've got just this central location where data can be stored. Then the customer understands it, they see it. I think you're probably going to have to get over a couple of hurdles before we get to that end goal of a data lake.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest one that I see on a daily basis is cloud security.
Yep.
And if you talk with a customer, they're very level-headed about it. Their IT has done their job, and they've done a good job of it. And they tell them, they're like, hey, this, you need to check this and make sure that it's secure before you allow it to be used. And what a lot of project managers on the customer side hear through that is don't use the cloud, which is probably a good mindset to have if you just want to avoid any sort of data breach. But if you just have a conversation with them and explain the security, you can start to give them the narrative and the honest truth of it, which is it's going to be cheaper. It's probably going to be more secure if it's set up properly. And you need to do a little bit of due diligence on verifying that it's set up properly, because it's easy to hand wavingly say it's secure. But that's the first one that we see on a daily basis, is making sure that they understand and they're comfortable with the solution we're using, because I think all of these solutions at some point are going to touch the cloud. So you just need to be prepared to answer those questions and in a place where you can make them feel comfortable about it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we jumped into a few different technologies along our discussion there the last few minutes, starting with laser scanning. Why don't I give you the opportunity? What's one of the next technologies that you kind of are leading some innovation in, or either already fully implementing and you guys are utilizing or interested in?
Yeah, so right now, it's kind of that augmented assisted reality. 4 years ago, when I was kind of proposing on it, the end goal, and we talked about visualization, the end goal for these visualization technologies, and for me, I would like to see a wearable technology that you could deploy in the field and see, the 3D model that you've built compared against the as-built, find conflicts in that as-built, identify changes on the fly, visualize it all. Eventually that'll feed into, some sort of BIM. But just when you're in construction, it's invaluable. I don't know if there's a piece of hardware out there yet. I've seen Trimble Sight Vision, where they've got the high accuracy GPS, and that's solving one of the biggest parts of that puzzle, which is that sub-centimeter accuracy. So I think that one, I haven't got my hands on it yet, but when I do, I think that one shows quite a bit of promise. It's a handheld. From a safety perspective and from an efficiency perspective, I really like the idea of wearables, where you don't necessarily need to have your hands busy. You can just see this model as you work with it and just construct it directly from the model. 3 years ago, I saw one construction company did a proof of concept with the HoloLens, where they actually had their CEO put on the HoloLens, and he built just a bathroom from the holograms, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
There's a pretty low-level proof of concept, but I think, as you go down the road a ways, that's really what I'd like to see.
Yeah. It's
some sort of safe wearable where you can see the 3D model, maybe even if it's got the accuracy on it, maybe even build directly from the model.
Yeah.
I think that would be just the coolest thing ever if we can get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see how that continues to develop. What about another one that comes up as a challenge that people are dealing with right now is data sizes, especially when you're talking about reality capture technologies, storage of data, delivering data to clients, dealing with like point clouds versus extracting that back into models or drawings. Are you guys utilizing point clouds directly, or do you typically convert those into models 100% of the time or 50% of the time?
It depends on the project. In the projects I've worked on, we've just worked directly from the point cloud. It was not a complex project where you were designing out of the point cloud. It was more, like I mentioned, with the electrical clearance, where you're checking clearances, checking dimensions, because those are massive files. Most of the time, we can't work out of even a server on the network. We have to direct download it to the computer. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just too big, and it can't keep up with the processing, and it tends to crash a lot. So what we try to do in some of the projects where they're like in the oil and gas area they will convert it to a model. So they'll get their basic simplified diagram instead of working with all the points. They'll have it as a layer that they can enable if they need to. But typically we try to convert them over to models to kind of reduce it, because you start playing around with them and just moving the mouse a little bit. If that is a large point cloud, it can take, a few seconds for it to readjust, and people start to lose their train of thought when that happens, and they forget the next step. I can't remember the term, but there was a term back in the 80s where if your processor took a certain amount of time, the individual became less efficient using the computer because they would lose track of their train of thought. And you start to see that a little bit again with these massive data sets.
Yeah. What have you guys had to update individual computers that people who might utilize this data within your company are using, or do you guys kind of take a company-wide approach to your computers, or what?
It's typically a company-wide approach. I will say that the individuals who work, it's typically drafters and designers who are, really in the weeds on the design software. They'll do that, and then the engineers can come in and give guidance. They typically have a much more robust computer than an average engineer, just a huge tower that can really handle the processing power. For the engineers who need to work directly in the point cloud, we will have their laptop, and then when they need to work from the point cloud, we'll have a shared station, which is a much more powerful computer where they can just jump into the point cloud for a little bit. So it's a mixed bag. It just depends on the situation.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, because we've heard several different platforms, what computers are you guys running? And have you gone with the same brand when you get kind of the higher end for data processing, or do you have different types that you're running?
We have a similar brand. So we have just ThinkPad Lenovo's. Okay. It depends on what your position is within our company. Project managers will actually be given just a Surface Pro. They don't need any of the processing power. They're project managers. They're just going to work in, Outlook and typical softwares like that. And then in terms of traveling, they love it because they don't have to carry around this bulky laptop.
Yep.
Engineers, I have a P6 right now, which is a little bit starting to get at end of its life. You just go up the Lenovo chain and we'll get probably the most up-to-date version of that.
Okay.
And then we've got the towers, and the towers are just, basically small supercomputers for the drafters where they can run those, AutoCAD, Bentley MicroStation, things like that.
Yep. Awesome. What, within kind of the new technologies, are there any other challenges that off the top of your head you're kind of facing right now?
So I mentioned changed management.
Yep.
In the office, it's a little bit more controllable. You can have training set up, explaining to people why this is important and why they should take the time and the effort to learn it. But really out in the field, construction guys they're a little bit rough around the edges. They don't always do what they're told. They want to get the project done, and they know how to get that project done, and you're asking them to try this newfangled technology. A lot of them still don't even have a smartphone. They'll still have a flip phone. So, I mean, trying to how do you train them? Well, you got to fly out there. With COVID, we found a lot of help from Microsoft Teams, just doing digital virtual trainings.
Yeah.
And COVID helps a little bit because they're kind of being forced to do it. But in the past, what we saw was we would have project managers be like, yep, we're going to use this. Let's send it to site. We send it to site, and maybe the subcontractor doesn't care for it, or whomever it may be, and it'll just sit there. But we've got those stories, though, where they do use it, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. We should use this on every site. So I think that's a hurdle, is just getting those types of people that have been working in the field for 30 years. How do we get their mindset focused into like this next step, next gen, innovative mindset? I think part of it will be you just need to have younger people on site who have been a little bit more in touch with it, grew up with it. Those guys have been out there for 30 years. I mean, they didn't grow up with that type of technology. They probably did not have a computer at their house when they were younger. And so it's a pretty significant learning curve for them. So I think part of it is you'll start to see more and more people adopt it as the next generation gets into the construction environment. But that's one of the struggles and hurdles that we've seen across the board.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that there's for certain industries, which obviously in our discussion, we focused a lot on industrial, oil and gas. One of the feedbacks we've seen there over the years is, this technology and some of the use cases are perfect for the fact that there are guys out there with knowledge, and there are new techs coming in, new engineers are getting hired on at the oil and gas company who are trying to come in and understand and learn. And technology is a great way, if you can marry the two of those, of taking the information from those, experienced individuals, plugging it even into the digital assets and using that to train the people that are getting onboarded as a way to kind of save that information, versus having those guys with the experience retire off, and now you have this new person come in and they're like, I have no idea where within this facility, this thing that I need to get to is. The only other way for them to become very familiar with a specific facility they're assigned to is physically being in it, which is not ideal. The fact, again, we've talked about trying to get that to a full virtual model asset and pushing that even to that next step of simulations and virtual reality, where anybody that's onboarded within that company could sit there and do virtual training for the first couple weeks, just like a video game. But instead of it being a hypothetical situation, you're walking through the actual facility you are now becoming, employed by. You can walk around where the actual stairs are to step over this pipe. Where the actual shutoff valve is, where the eye wash station, you can explore and really get yourself familiar with that facility before ever even stepping foot in it, and having to wonder where things might be. I think that's one of the big applications for the virtual.
Yeah, knowledge capture in general is such a huge upcoming problem. Some industries are seeing it right now. So it's a prevalent problem, which is, how do you capture that knowledge, that tribal knowledge within your organization that basically runs the organization? There's been a lot of facilities that I've gone to where we'll ask a question after reviewing the drawing package, and we'll say, well, what about this area? The drawings aren't really showing any clarification on it. How do you want this to operate? How does it operate? And they'll say, oh, there's one person in our entire organization that knows how to do this. And it's like, okay, well, let's make sure we capture that on the drawing, so that way if that person retires, which is happening, very frequently now, not only just people retiring because they're getting to the point where they want to, but a lot of organizations are now starting to incentivize retirement, and doing retirement buyout packages. And so it's expediting that process a little bit. You start to combine models, knowledge capture. You can add virtual reality in there if you want to. I think from a safety standpoint, that's an amazing technology. You can train muscle memory, which is something that if you're just looking on your laptop, it's like, okay, it's like Google Street View. You start to get the idea. Anytime I go to any new city or airport, and especially airports, I'm like, okay, I've got 25 minutes to get off of this plane and get on the next plane. How am I supposed to sprint these 3 miles through? And so I always get onto the Street View. Usually they've got something like that in an airport. And I'm like, okay, there's that little art exhibit on the side. I need to take a right there. If you can put that into virtual reality and actually have people learn muscle memory, that's a huge part of performing a task that we don't really think a whole lot about until we get there and we've been doing it for a while, and you just naturally know how to do something.
Yeah.
When I train my users on the RealWear technology, I always tell them practice makes perfect. Go around your house and just practice with it. And things like virtual reality and, integrating those models into it, along with whatever tribal knowledge you've captured and digitized. I think that's where it is going towards in the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the technology. So we even recently were talking with someone from Microsoft, and talking about that same idea, like, where is the future? And seeing, not even just in typical public spaces, but even in this scenario, like within facilities, within construction sites, getting to that point that there's even personalized experiences where you're walking in, whether it's a glasses you're wearing or your phone or something, and instead of just a general map, it's like it literally is going to show you where to get to what it is that you're looking for. Or, within public spaces, like you ask a question or something, and then you get to visualize the path, how to get to a suggested space. Or, I think it's going to get interesting to keep seeing that mix of not even just LiDAR and models, but then sensors and data integration with all of it.
Yeah, one of the things I watch Westworld. I've no spoilers here in this podcast, but they do have augmented reality glasses that they use to train people. And then one of the other things I saw in there, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a visual. We have a tendency when we talk about augmented reality, assisted reality, mixed reality, we think visual. But I've seen a lot of technologies come out that are audio, and they are significantly impacting the way work is performed. You have a digital assistant. I saw Google just came out with their next iteration of the Google Pixel Buds, and those look impressive, where it has Google Assistant built into it. Mm-hmm. You integrate Google Assistant or Siri or whatever your digital assistant is into that database, that model, and train it to give it that personalized experience. If it knows your location, if it knows what you do, if it knows what your task that's been assigned to you is, it can really start to filter that data out, and really you can ask it general questions and it'll be able to give you a pretty precise answer to what you're looking for. And so that's one of the things about AR, MR, that I think we focus a lot on the visual side. Mm-hmm. And I think that the industry is starting to swing a little bit to the audio side now. I think there's a lot of value to be added with the visual, but I really like the idea of the audio side of it going forward. I think that could be a smaller stepping stone for people to go forward with it on.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. All right, one more thing I'd like to get your feedback on is, so for you internally, do you guys do most of your own data collection, processing, and whether the answer is yes or no? Next, on top of that being, how do you handle, or is it an issue that sometimes you might have projects in a location that's, remote or far away, or, and all this is kind of stemming from an idea of having a network of professionals. It's something that we've seen kind of potentially having value in, is building out a network of, where is everybody in the country that is working with this technology, that has an expertise in a certain industry, so that instead of only relying on this one guy on the other side of the country that you think is the only person who owns a laser scanner, we've seen it kind of cause a delay in the implementation of the technology, because sometimes it's, people are like, we don't think there's anyone near us who has a scanner, so let's not even scan. Or sometimes there's projects that you don't want to incorporate all the travel and expense and delay in time and everything. So all that to say, we're trying to look at, what if we built it out to where we had this process of knowing everybody in the country who had a certain type of scanner that could be brought in for a certain project locally, just for that portion of the work.
Mm-hmm. So Burns McDonnell, we're a pretty big company, about 8,000 employee owners across the United States, some in Canada, and then we've also opened up some other international facilities. I will say a bulk of our individuals that work for Burns McDonnell and our work is in the United States. So we kind of ship the devices around as needed, and we self-perform a lot of those data collection efforts. Mm-hmm. But in some situations, we do require our subcontractors to go out there and provide that information for us. So a lot of it's internal. We do a pretty good job, I will say, internally executing those projects. But for the ones that we might not be able to get a scanner to, we try to have subcontractors, construction subcontractors do that. 80% of the time they can't do it in-house, so then they'll go to someone else and find someone else to do it for them, a sub of a sub. Mm-hmm. So it's a mixed bag, but we do a pretty decent chunk of them ourselves.
Yeah, awesome. What about the processing of that data as well? We see a mix of firms that do all their own modeling, when it comes to actually dealing with point clouds. And we see others that are looking for people to help with drafting from data or processing laser scans. Is that fully in-house, or is that a mix as well?
Yeah, that's almost fully in-house. If we get the raw data, we'll do that all in-house. So that way we can kind of see what exactly is going on. We don't want someone to make some small assumption that they did not know was a big deal until an engineer got an eye on it. So we typically do all of our data processing in-house.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Any other topics you'd like to hit on?
I think we've done a pretty amazing job, honestly, covering all of the industry. I think it'd take a couple of beers to provide all of the answers about the future. But yeah, in general, if you can do model-based design, that's really the first step. I know a lot of people still do 2D design, and for good reason. I mean, they're existing drawing sets, but if you want to get the ball rolling within your organization, just try to start doing something innovative. It doesn't have to be some huge overarching company program. It can be as small as go out there with your cell phone, and instead of just taking all of the photos on your cell phone and putting them directly to your computer, use Esri, ArcGIS, use Raken, use some sort of organized data capture. It doesn't have to be sophisticated, but as you slowly build on this organization of the data, you'll start to get there. So that's the one message I'd like to leave everyone with, is this isn't some grandiose big thing. You're slowly chiseling away at it. It takes time. But if you get going with it, you'll get there at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think that is a good note, is getting started. Because I don't know if you even remember the first time you had laser scanning on a job, or got into the new technology, but it's one of those scenarios that we see all the time when you find a client who's never seen it or is kind of afraid to implement new technology. As soon as you actually use it and show them what they get from it, then it's like the light bulb's finally on, like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. I can't believe that we still have people traveling with tape measures. The technology is to the point with certain processes. A lot of companies, I think, still have a ways to go before they find a way to fully implement and utilize and see the value out of some of the mixed reality and AR and virtual reality. But some of the basic things, like site capture with drones integrated in survey and laser scanning, those are finally to the point that it is cheap enough. The technology's there. It's ready to go to hand over to give you value. And I think it's always that hurdle of the first project, I think, where people are afraid. They know their typical process. They know that the engineers are going to measure what they need. So they're afraid to say, okay, let's try scanning. But as soon as you do it, you're like, oh my gosh, we can just now walk through the whole thing. We forgot to measure this, door opening. No, like, you already have it in the data. You don't have to fly back. You didn't forget to take a picture of this valve. All you got to do is jump in the panoramic and look over there and take a snapshot. Like, you get so much more data out of it. So I think you're right on with encouraging people to just take that first step, even if it is simpler than scanning, even if it's, try out panoramic photos. Like, it's still better than not. It's still better than single photos and hand measurements. Like, take 360 photos, get into scanning, and if you need to find out more about them, that is our goal with this podcast, with this network, is helping educate people, helping point them in the right direction, help connect them with a company who knows how to do what they're looking to do. Because really, for the most part, there's not a whole lot of one-stop shops. It's really, there's companies all over the country that specialize in one versus the other. There's firms that are trying to pull it in-house. Let's just try to make those connections.
Yeah, I think that's great. And hopefully all the listeners, if you haven't already started, hopefully we've given you somewhere to begin your journey down.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for joining us today. We appreciate it. I think it'd be great to have you continue to stay involved. We don't have anything planned specifically yet, but we've been talking with individuals about we'll keep an eye on how things go with COVID and physical conferences. I know a lot of us go to things like Autodesk University and SPAR, and just somewhere to get together and network, as well as educate each other. And I think what we may end up doing is doing some type of virtual event where we maybe have a panel of 10 or 20 speakers and do some live Q&A with people online from LinkedIn and from our network of followers, where we can kind of do a virtual conference, since a lot of people are missing out on things that were planned for this summer. And I think it's still a little unknown as to when that might open up. So we'll keep you updated, and I think we'd love to have you involved if so.
Yeah, I'd love to be there.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, and we'll talk to you again soon. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Talk to you later.
Reality Capture Network, bringing the future to you.